Yesterday I described how Stephen was one of the 7 deacons who were the men who are chosen to oversee the distribution of food to the Hellenic widows to make sure that they weren't neglected. But Stephen is clearly much more, not that that isn't an important role to take care of the individual needs of the members, but God has something much greater in store for Stephen. And back in chapter 6 and verse 8, it says, Stephen, full of grace and power, did great wonders and signs among the people. And so he is really going to be someone who's going to be impactful. And he ends up getting arrested because people are concerned that he's leading people towards Jesus and away from other things. And so he is brought before the council, and the high priest asked him, are these things so? That basically they're accusing him of speaking against the temple and against the customs that Moses handed on to us. And then in chapter 7 and verse 2, Stephen replies, and Stephen's speech to the council represents 5% of the entire book of Acts. And in his speech, which I encourage you to read in its entirety, it's chapter 7, verse 2, and it goes all the way through the end of chapter 7. He is describing how God has worked. It's like a summary, if you will, from Genesis 12 and the call of Abraham all the way through the enslavement of the Hebrews in Egypt, the Exodus, the giving of the covenant. And you'll notice that there's this constant reference to what God does and what God had made and before God, and how it's Moses grew up in Egypt and then he's 40 years old and God was working through him, and the angel appeared to him in the flame of the burning bush. And Moses is obviously highly revered, and here's Stephen speaking to the Jewish leaders of the council. And so he's not demeaning Moses in any way. He's actually highlighting the importance of Moses. And in verse 37, it says, this is the Moses who said to the Israelites, God will raise up a prophet for you from your own people as he raised me up. And Stephen is trying to make the point that he and his other early Christians, they're not speaking against the temple, they're not speaking against Judaism. They are, in fact, speaking that Jesus is the fulfillment of what Moses had declared, that Jesus is the prophet that Moses foresaw God would raise up in latter days. And then Stephen goes on to make the point that just as people, the Jewish people in Moses' time, many of them were unwilling to obey him and pushed him aside, and in their hearts they turned back to Egypt. In the same way, Stephen is making the point that Jesus came to his own people, and some of them did not receive him. We will see how this goes over tomorrow, but you can guess it doesn't go over well. But we believe, as Christians, that Jesus is the one that Moses was pointing to and who Moses foresaw, the prophet whose words we are to obey.